The waning sun dipped low over the Colorado plains, spilling amber light across frontier springs. The wind carried a fine powder of dust that curled along the boardwalks, rattling shutters and slipping through cracks in weather-worn timber. At the edge of town, past a row of shuttered storefronts and wagons, leaning under the weight of freight, a figure approached the gates of Rancho Silverleaf. Mary Bennett moved with a weary determination, her skirts torn and patched, her boots nothing more than frayed leather. A crooked basket hung by her side, filled with remnants of bread and worn cloth. Her hands gripped the strap until knuckles whitened, her fingers trembling with fatigue. Each step seemed to pull harder against her strength, the chill of late autumn sinking through her thin wool. Ahead, the great stone ranch house rose like a fortress. Pale walls etched with the last gold of sunset, wide verandas stretching like arms across the earth, carved columns reaching to hold the fading light. She stopped at the great gate, hesitant. Her breath came in short, ragged draws. For a moment, she studied the stillness within the ranch, then stepped forward. A deep rut in the dirt caught her foot. Her body pitched forward, knees striking the ground with a sharp scrape. The basket swung wildly, spilling crumbs across the dust. Mary steadied herself, clutching her skirts. She looked up. On the balcony above the gate, a steward in a dark coat, lean-faced and unsmiling, peered down at her. His eyes were cold steel. "Move along, woman," he said without warmth. "We do not welcome wanderers. There is no work for beggars here." Mary lifted her chin, her voice trembling but firm. "Please, sir, I have nowhere to go. No work, no shelter, no coin. I beg of you, allow me a place to labor." The steward glanced at her dismissively, then turned away. But a sound of movement caught her attention. Behind him, another figure stepped into the light, tall, broad-shouldered, clad in leather worn with travel, hair streaked with silver. Jacob Sterling. His eyes swept over her, calculating, unyielding. The quiet click of his spurs echoed like a judge's gavel. "You request work?" he said in a deep, even tone. "But what makes you worthy to care for my children?" And Mary inhaled sharply, finding a thread of courage. "My husband, he was taken by debt, by the lawless whispers of men. We lost everything, even the land. I have no kin left, no home to return to. I have only my hands and my will." The words came like breath in the cold air. Behind her, the gatekeeper and ranch hands had stopped talking. Even the wind seemed to hush. Jacob Sterling studied her. His expression betrayed nothing, but his gaze lingered, measuring her from boots to bonnet. "If you stay," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate, "you accept that every man and woman on this land will watch you, judge you. You accept the scrutiny of every pair of eyes here?" Mary's chest rose and fell. Fear and resolve warred inside her. Yet she stepped forward. "I accept, sir." Jacob turned away, his shoulders squared, voice carrying over the silence. "Then you will begin tomorrow. I offer no guarantee beyond food and shelter. Should you prove yourself worthy, perhaps more will come." She swallowed hard, the weight of those words pressing on her. This was her chance. Mary Bennett lifted her chin and passed through the gate. The heavy iron swung shut behind her. Dust rose at her feet. A hush followed her steps. She felt the scrutiny of every figure around her. The servants leaning in doorways, the ranch hands resting against rails, whispers carried like wind. She drew her shawl tighter and pressed onward. Somewhere deep inside, Mary knew she had stepped beyond survival. She had stepped into a reckoning. That night, the wind moaned through the rafters of the ranch house. Mary lay in a narrow room among chipped wood and rough blankets, the sound like a chorus of ghosts. Her thoughts drifted back to Cedar Creek years ago. Back then, she had a home, a husband, a child. But threats had come in the dark. Men emboldened by greed, a corrupt judge's verdict. They had stolen the land, torn apart the home, left her with nothing but loss. She shut her eyes tightly, pressing her hand against her chest. The wound remained unhealed. By dawn, she rose with the first light. She dressed in patched skirts and a faded blouse, her hair pinned back with rough thread. In the kitchen, she stoked the fire, scrubbed pans, set the table. The hearth's dull roar was the only sound, broken only by the scrape of her worn boots. Upstairs, behind painted doors, Clara and Anna slept. Mary carried bowls of steaming oatmeal toward the nursery, each step measured. She knocked softly. "Clara? Anna?" Clara's eyelids fluttered open. Anna stirred beside her, rubbing her cheek. Mary entered quietly, kneeling beside the cot. Clara recoiled slightly when Mary reached toward her. "Don't touch me!" she cried. Mary drew back for a moment, then placed her palm over her heart and spoke gently. "It's all right, Clara, I'm here." Slowly, Clara's small hand trembled toward her. Mary guided her softly, murmuring words she barely understood herself. From the hallway, silent watchers leaned on beams and doorframes. Whispers broke the quiet. "A street girl," one maid muttered. "She's no fit for those children," another said under her breath. The air carried the scent of doubt. Jacob Sterling stood on the landing above, silent, watching. His shadow cut across the morning light like a blade. Mary moved with tender patience, pouring porridge, coaxing the children to eat, soothing tears. Her voice was low, her touch careful. Later that morning, Anna began to cough harshly, small shoulders heaving. Mary moved quickly, lifting her into her arms, patting her back. "Steady now," she murmured. Clara watched silently from the doorway, eyes wide. Jacob descended the stairs, his boots striking wood with purpose. He came close, his gaze fixed. "Do you know what you're doing?" he asked quietly. Mary's throat tightened. "I had brothers once. I learned early to care for children." He said nothing more, turning away. But the silence between them carried weight. That night, Mary lay in her small room, the wind rattling the shutters again. Her mind replayed the day, the doubt, the children's cries, Jacob's watchful eyes. She pressed her hands to her chest and whispered into the darkness, "Let me be enough." The next morning, Clara approached her as Mary prepared breakfast. "Will you stay, Mama?" the child asked softly, her voice trembling. Mary's breath caught. She forced a calm smile, meeting Clara's gaze. "Yes, Clara, I will stay." Later, Jacob passed her door and paused at the sound of muffled sobs. He knocked lightly. Mary tried to collect herself. "What troubles you?" he asked quietly. "I carry ghosts," she confessed. "Memories I cannot escape." Jacob said nothing, retreating without a word. His silence was both acknowledgement and distance. That day Mary worked with quiet resolve, scrubbing floors and tending to chores. Every motion was a testament to her promise. At dusk, she knelt in the garden behind the house, pressing seeds into cool soil. She planted them like prayers for Clara, Anna, her lost child, and herself. That evening she whispered again to the children, to the wind, to her own heart, "I will stay. I will care. I will belong." But life at Silverleaf would test her more than she imagined. Winter's breath crept over the valley. Mary grew unwell, fever tightening her chest. Still, she rose at dawn to begin her tasks. Jacob noticed. That morning, he placed a tin cup of water and a bundle of herbs at her door. Without speaking, he entered her room and laid a damp cloth on her forehead. "Rest," he said. Then he left her in quiet watchfulness. Soon after, Clara awoke burning with fever. Mary, despite her weakness, lifted her to her lap. Anna cried softly beside them. Jacob appeared at the door, his voice edged with concern. Mary shook her head. "Just time," she whispered. The days passed. Mary recovered slowly. She spent afternoons with the children, guiding Clara's small hand as she traced letters in charcoal, humming soft tunes with Anna at her feet. Jacob watched, still at a distance, but always near enough to witness. One evening, Mary stood on the porch, wind tangling her skirts, watching the sky turn purple and gold. Jacob joined her, his voice low. "I saw Clara writing her name. You gave her faith." The wind came in ragged gusts over the plains, rattling the shutters of Rancho Silverleaf and carrying a strange foreboding. Jacob Sterling was in the barn, oil lamp in hand, checking the grain bends when the gate creaked open. The sound carried sharp in the cold night air. Horses whinnied in the corral. 3 riders approached, silhouettes carved against the dying light. Dust swirled around their boots, drifting like ghosts across the earth. One rider dismounted, a man of lean build wearing a coat of deep black and a glint of a badge at his breast. He stepped forward, boots scuffing the wooden planks of the gate. His voice was smooth, almost oily. "Mr. Sterling," he said. "Mr. Langley sends his regards." Jacob's shoulders stiffened. Langley should keep his regards to himself. The man smiled faintly, but his eyes never softened. "You've a fine piece of land here, Sterling. Water past your work. Langley's been making offers. You've refused them all, He says this is your final warning. Jacob said nothing, his jaw set. Tell Langley this land will not be sold. Not now, not ever. The man tipped his hat, a gesture more mocking than courteous. You'd better be prepared then. Storms are coming, and not just storms of weather. He turned his horse, the others following, their boots striking the dust. Their departure left an uneasy hush over the ranch. Inside, Mary was at the hearth in the kitchen, ladling thick stew into bowls for Clara and Anna. She didn't notice the faint shimmer of something unusual in the broth, nor the bitter aftertaste when she tasted it. Somewhere beyond the veranda, in the shadow of trees, eyes followed her quietly. That evening, Mary's legs gave way under her. The bowl she carried clattered to the floor, spilling its contents across the rough boards. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps. Her knees bent, her hands grasped at nothing. She fell heavily into the table, head bowed. Mary. Clara's voice echoed upstairs, small and uncertain. Before she could answer, Jacob's boots sounded on the steps. He was at her side in moments, his voice low but urgent. Mary, open your eyes. She stirred weakly. I'm all right. Don't speak, he said, lifting her with steady strength. Saddle my horse. Now. The wind had risen outside, cutting sharp and cold. Jacob wrapped her in his coat as he mounted, her head resting against his chest. He rode hard into the night, the sound of hoofbeats lost to the roaring of the prairie wind. The path to Millstone Outpost was treacherous, ridges steep, creeks iced over and hidden by shadow. Mary lay in Jacob's arms, fever making her skin burn, breath coming in shallow waves. At last, they reached a small inn, its windows glowing warmly in the dark. Jacob lifted her inside, shouting for aid. An old nurse rushed them into a dim back room. What did she eat? The nurse asked sharply. Stew, Jacob said between breaths. She made it herself. The nurse's brows knitted as she examined Mary. She sniffed at the cloth Mary had coughed into. Belladonna, poison, enough to slow the heart. Jacob's hands clenched, his voice low but hard. Who would dare? The nurse said nothing more but worked quickly. Mary drifted between fever and sleep, her breath ragged. Hours passed before her eyes fluttered open. Jacob was there, kneeling beside her bed, his hand gripping hers like a lifeline. I thought I'd lost you, he said, voice breaking. I'm here, she whispered faintly, her fingers curling around his. Don't leave me. Later, back at Silverleaf, one of the ranch hands brought word of a man seen lurking near the kitchen earlier. Under questioning, the stranger confessed. Langley, the mining baron, had promised him land and gold if he could plant seeds of doubt about Mary's presence. He had been hired to turn Jacob against her. You tried to poison the heart of my home, Jacob said quietly, the weight of his voice cutting through the barn. His eyes never left the man's face. Mary recovered slowly in the days that followed, still pale but determined. Clara and Anna watched her with wide eyes, sensing something unspoken. Mary's every movement was careful, preparing meals, tending fires, guiding Clara's fingers over scraps of parchment. One morning, Jacob found her in the garden. The wind tugged at her skirts as she pressed seeds into the soil. Her hands were dirt, streaked, but her face held quiet resolve. Planting hope, she said softly when he approached. Jacob didn't answer. He stood beside her in silence, watching her work. But rumors spread through Frontier Springs as fast as the wind. Whispers began at the tavern, wound their way through the streets. Jacob Sterling was harboring a woman with a shadowed past. Langley had not forgotten, and he was preparing his move. By noon, the bell in the square rang sharply. A crowd gathered at the courthouse before the dust had even settled from the morning. Langley stood among them in polished boots and dark coat, his men surrounding him like wolves. His voice rose above the murmur. Order must be upheld! Sterling harbors someone with ties to the outlaw country. We must ask ourselves, who will protect us if we let such a woman raise children among us? Heads turned toward Mary. Some regarded her with pity, others with suspicion. A whisper rose. She's not one of us. Another voice muttered, she came in rags and now walks like a lady. Jacob stepped forward from the crowd, tall and deliberate. His voice rang out clear. This woman stands under my protection. She is not your accusation. She is my answer. Mary felt the weight of his words press against her. Eyes followed her. The curious, the doubtful, the hostile. Jacob moved to her side, the dust clinging to his boots like an unspoken shield. That night, the wind carried rumors and threats over Silverleaf. Mary lay awake, thinking of the children she had promised to protect. Clara slept beside her in the small chamber they shared, Anna somewhere close. She thought of her own son, lost in storms of debt and cruelty, and felt a quiet determination. She would not be driven away. The days that followed were tense. Langley's presence in the town grew more pronounced, his voice rising in taverns and gatherings. Jacob met every challenge with silence or steel. Mary threw herself into her work with quiet steadfastness, caring for the children, tending fires, mending clothes. She lived with the knowledge that her place at Silverleaf depended on her proving herself again and again. One afternoon, as the wind rose over the prairie, Mary and Jacob met by the edge of the garden. Clara and Anna played nearby, their laughter carried away by the breeze. Jacob's eyes lingered on her. "You've changed this place," he said quietly. Mary looked down. "I only try to keep what I have been given." "Yet you give more than you know," he replied. Their silence stretched, filled by the sound of the wind, the laughter of children, and something neither dared name. Trust had been planted like seeds in the earth, and it was growing. But the threat of Langley loomed still. One cold morning, a rider arrived at the gate with news. Langley was gathering men, planning to come to Silverleaf to demand answers. Jacob called the ranch hands together. "If he comes here, we will not falter." Mary stood with them in the barnyard, her hand brushing Clara's hair away from her face. She felt a steady strength in her chest. The woman who had once begged for bread now stood ready to defend what she had claimed. Not just shelter, but belonging. That night, as storm clouds gathered over Frontier Springs, Mary sat beside the nursery window, holding Clara's hand. Outside, wind whispered through the prairie. Somewhere deep in the shadows, Langley's voice was already rising. But inside Rancho Silverleaf, a different promise was being made. Mary looked toward the darkened fields, her voice barely above a whisper. "We will not let them take this from us." And Jacob, standing silent behind her, placed a hand over hers. Neither spoke. The promise had been made without words. Whatever came with the dawn, storms of wind, of law, of violence, they would meet it together. The wind howled low over Frontier Springs. Somewhere in the night, horses shifted uneasily. Rancho Silverleaf stood silent but unbroken, a fortress of stone and will. And within it Mary Bennett, once ragged and broken, stood unshaken, her resolve forged in dust and grief, her heart set upon something stronger than fear,